Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 27th day of January 2021, and what I'm going to talk to you about is a doctrine in the church. And this is intended for those who are in the church, who believe in these doctrines and don't know where they really come from. So this is not geared to those who are not involved in the church. This is mainly for those who are still in the church. And my warning to you is this: you need to get out of the church. You need to realize that basically it's a way of actually stealing from you, and you never really actually discover who you are, and so you are in bondage, and they're claiming that you're not in bondage, and so they offer these enormous doctrines and dogmas that really are not true. So the doctrine I'm going to talk about is called imputation. And imputation is simply this: that Adam's sin it has an effect upon you, that is, to all posterity. In other words, when Adam failed and fall that took place in the garden, what took place was that not only was Adam and Eve were punished according to scriptures, but all of mankind was punished since then. And what I mean by that simply is, this is ludicrous. This is ridiculous. Why would two people have enormous effect upon everybody else? Why would that happen? And there are four views here of the imputation. Most are not aware that, and I'll kick this in here, that the Reformed churches, the doctrines of John Calvin and Martin Luther. The Luther is more of a Lutheran, so I won't say that it would be in the Reformed church. And doctrines also of John Knox, which is part of the Presbyterian Church. The sad fact is that a lot of this is based upon them going back to, that is, Calvin and Luther going back to the point of Augustine. Well, Augustine lived, in the 300s. That is actually the late 300s to the 400s. So where's the rest of the church history here? You see, the church actually, before this whole thing, before Constantine in 325 AD, when he actually brought all these groups of churches together, that is bishops, and what he was trying to do was to make all have the same type of doctrines. Most before then did not have all these doctrines. You follow? So most churches were independent. There was no Holy Roman Church until after Constantine. This is what people fail to see or understand in the church. In fact, they don't even want to teach you this hardly in any church history classes anymore in seminary. Because if you did, you would begin to figure out something's not right here. Because there was a different perspective of there was no such thing as original sin taught in early church. Oh, there was such a thing as sin, but not original sin. And so this is all based upon what Constantine wanted. He collected what he called bishops that would actually agree with him. Those that did not agree with him, they were gone. They were no longer a part of his whole group that he was involved in. So he was going to make Rome, the Roman Empire, into a dynasty, and he wanted to be all the eastern part and the western to work together and be together. Unfortunately, he failed to make one. He made a big error. Later on, we'll see this take place, is that, guess what? The church in Rome taught Latin, and the church in East taught Greek. And they never got along. They got along for a while, and eventually they will split up later on. I think it's 1054. The other thing that's critical for us to understand is that there are many church councils that take place, and the first one was actually with Constantine at the Council of Nicaea. And what takes place there is the beginning of what we call the unraveling, and then also of different doctrines that is to be built upon a hierarchy and built upon a system of theology. So it all had to be congruent, you see. So there is a group that actually was separated for a while. It was called the not only Anabaptists, but also the group that the Arminius was involved in, which was the group that's Arminian. That is the belief system that you have free will. The Reformed churches and the Catholics refuse to see that. They see that basically you never had free will. So that's how this is based upon. Unfortunately, Arminius is not eventually watered down. Eventually became enormously watered down in what he taught. And we'll do a video on him also. He was a Dutch theologian back in the 1600s, if I recollect right. So let me go ahead and go into this because I want to lay a groundwork here. I also want to lay a groundwork here also with Reformation, and I've said this before to people, and that is simply is the Reformation it's reform. It's not getting rid of the foundation of the church. Do you understand? It's reforming the church. You see, it's going back, but it's not taking out the foundation of what Augustine taught. See, this is critical for you to understand because most people don't understand it because they don't take church history. And almost all of your pastors don't take but 3 or 4 classes on church history. And most today, as I've looked at seminaries, don't even teach patristic history, that is early church history, at all anymore. They don't see it as important. Why would they? Because their focal point is Augustine and on up and onward to the area of the Renaissance, and then after then it's the Reformation until what we call present day. So it's how they teach church history today. And I was fortunate to go to a seminary that did not have that. I had a professor who taught early church history or patristic church history, whichever way you want to call it. And it's important that you understand these things because you're the blind. You're the ones that have been blind. You've been fooled, you see. So here we go. Let's go with what we call the federal or immediate view, which was pushed by what we call Warfield. That is B.B. Warfield, a theologian in the past. This affirms that first, Adam's sin is imputed in all his posterity. Second, as a result of this imputation of sin, all men incur penal guilt. Third, all those who incur the guilt of Adam's sin will also render polluted by sin. That is, depravity or corruption is also inflicted. And the representative people who would actually give affirmation to this would be Charles Hodge and Latimer Boatner. That's the first view. The next school would be called the New School or Mediate view, which simply this affirms that the corruption of our nature when we receive from Adam is imputed. This then becomes the basis of penal guilt and subsequently condemnation, not Adam's sin. Representative theologians who affirmed this view was Jonathan Edwards, also H.D. Smith, were part of this, and a particular French theologian called Placeus. I don't know how to pronounce that, so I'm just going to spell it to you. That'd be the best way. The third view was the agnostic view. This view was accepted. This view accepts the transmission of both guilt and depravity without attempting to explain their transmission. So they just kind of skimmed over it. In other words, a representative theologian of this firm was R.W. Landis, Landis. The fourth one is the key one because this is the one that 99% of the people don't even know they're a part of. Is the Augustinian or realistic view. This affirms that all mankind was present in Adam. as generically humanity. In other words, this took us all the way back to him, and we're as though we're there, even though we're not there. But in reality, this is what they're teaching. When Adam sinned, we all sin, and that's in past tense, okay? And thus became guilty and subject to condemnation. Essentially, there is no imputation per se. Representative theologians who affirm this view are simply as Augustine. Of course, he's the one that pretty much started it. John Calvin, G.J. Shedd, S-H-E-D-D, and Strong, which is the one who wrote the Strong's Pository on the words of the Bible. So these are the four views that are represented here. And this takes up about 99% of the church. Now, I want to point out something else that's critical for you to understand here, is that when I talk about going back to the area of simply as the Reformation, if we look at the Lutheran view of the communion service, and we look at the view of what took place in the Calvin view of communion, they're almost similar to the Roman Catholic Church. You see, the transubstantiation and the consubstantiation is to do with the churches, and the Roman Catholics would say simply is with the wine and the bread were representing the true body of Christ and his blood. They would not say it was a symbol or anything. They would say simply is it was a directly you're eating you're eating Jesus' body. That's what they're saying. It's a little less than that in the Lutheran view. It's not simply it's just the spirit is there. It's not actually the body of Christ and or the blood of Christ. So you follow me here now, okay? Because see, your understanding simply is there's only a rung drop down here, the differences between the Roman Catholic and the Lutheran view, and Calvinist also. And then today simply is what we call it's just simply an example of what Jesus did for us in most churches. That is, most Baptist churches. But that's not considered in the Presbyterian churches at all. Also, when I go back to Arminius, I should say, that the Baptists are directly part of the Arminian viewpoint, and so is the Methodists. But they would be considered by the Reformed churches as semi-Pelagians. But most of the preachers that teach there are not semi-Pelagians. They're actually Augustinian. Reform means simply is you keep the foundation. See, say for example, this is a good illustration here. I have a house, and I have a house here where I live at that has footers. That is, it has a base, and it has on the side of all the way around the house is what we call a foundation, and it's mainly a block. And see, so the house sits up on blocks. That is, so to speak. That is, it's about 3 feet or 2 feet, whatever it is, somewhere in that neighborhood above. And then the house is built upon that. You see? So when a fire comes and destroys everything except the foundation, the Reformation or Reformed doctrines are simply this. They just come back. They keep the structure there, the foundation, and they build back onto it. That's what it means. And they have what we call at one time Michael Horton, who is produced a magazine, I think still is, one of the magazine they're calling for a modern Reformation. So they're not changing anything. They're just simply saying we need to get back with what we were, back in the 1500s. You see? So 500 years later, such and such changes. We need to get back to that. So it's critical that you understand these things what I'm speaking of. And the other thing simply is that um, we'll talk about the atonement also in the future. But these are things that have actually been piece by piece been put on in the Protestant churches. Another critical thing you need to understand how these Protestant churches made it. Clearly, they were not without others helping them. And what do I mean by that? I simply mean this. And this is a difference between the Anabaptist movement that took place in the late 1500s. And that's to do with what I call that Germany, that is in Martin Luther in the city of, what's the name of the city? Now I just dropped my mind. Oh, shoot. Not Munster. It'll come to me. But he had a prince who protected him. See, all Germany was divided up in little, what they call little kingdoms or fiefs, we would call, or certain areas. And so what happened was simply is that it's in Wittenberg, sorry, Germany. And then John Calvin and Zwingli, which is the other major Reformed leaders, both are actually in Switzerland. One is in Zurich, and the other one's actually in Geneva. They have the support of city council. But I don't see this, as you go back in scriptures and look at it, I don't see that the church has any protection in the early church. You see, they didn't have any of that. See, this is another faulty foundation. See, this is the whole thing. People don't understand. That's why I say just simply is that the Protestants are actually only a branch of the Roman Catholic denomination, that is. And people would go completely wild over that and say, how can you say that? I can say it very clearly. They didn't do what supposedly the early church did. They didn't have any kingdom to protect them. They didn't have any government to protect them. You see, the Roman Catholic Church had all of Rome. You see, the emperor and the Pope worked together. They were in bed together, you see. They worked together in tandem. The Reformation just only came to another notch lower, but in reality, simply is it was still a church and state deal. I would challenge you to read some things by the Anabaptists, because reality simply is that they are far different than almost any group now. The problem is simply is the Anabaptists were in Europe, changed when they came here to America, and they basically become evangelicals, which is another group of Protestants, and to just get along. They came here to basically be farmers, and that would be your Amish, your Mennonites, and your Hutterites. All are based upon these beliefs, but most don't even know where their heritage is, in today. So this is how, and I'm not saying I back Anabaptist beliefs, but Anabaptists said no. If we go back to Michael Sadler, who was one of the leaders in the Swiss church, was trying to build the Anabaptists in the southern Germany area and also in Austria. They were sought to go to Strasbourg, and actually did go to Strasbourg, where Martin Butzer was at, and Wolfgang Cappuccino, were at, who was a free city, which meant that the churches there were allowed to be all churches. And so, in other words, there was a Reformed church, there was a Lutheran church, and there was a Catholic church there in Strasbourg. And they were all protected, you see. And so he went there to visit them, and he disagreed with them, because eventually Butzer came to him and says, look, you put yourself under them. In other words, protection of the city. If not, you're not welcome here, basically. So what happened was simply is that the Anabaptists were a group of people These are the early Anabaptists. Eventually, some Anabaptists become more radical, but I'm talking about the real. There are two bases, basically, what I'm talking about here. The Anabaptists had a powerful area, what we call parts of Austria, that is in Western Austria, parts of Switzerland, which is probably the northern part of northern part of Switzerland, and the southern part of Germany. And then the other area where the Anabaptists were strong were in the Dutch area, what we call Holland and the Netherlands, in that area later on. And that would be where we get the Mennonites from, because that's where their base is, and with Menno Simons being their leader there. But there are also others. And eventually we come to the point within maybe 50, 60 years later, there's actually others that actually break away from that particular viewpoint that do not believe in the Trinity. And today we would see that modern adherents to that would be the Quakers and the Unitarians, because they don't believe in the Trinity at all. They just believe in one, you see, not three. And so this is interesting how you do this. Now, here's the question I've always asked people who are in the church, because I grew up in the church myself. Why don't you ask some questions with your pastors? Do you just simply follow them? You see, you know what a shepherd is, don't you? Well, he's there to protect the sheep, right? But eventually that shepherd gets rid of some sheep, doesn't he? Doesn't he? Think about it. He protects them, but it's for his own good. You see, most are fearful of the wolves, but in reality, simply is the shepherd is also the one who actually protects them, but he's also the one who takes their wool, and he eventually will kill them and actually have something of that meat with his family. You see, this is just a thought. You need to think about it. So this is just what I'm just trying to share with you tonight with the imputation. They always come up with these clever words: atonement, which, at one-ment, there's the three words in it: at one-ment, at atonement. There's so many there. There's a belief system before this. It's what we were taught in the early church, was called the ransom theory. Jesus paid the ransom to the Satan that is on the cross. I think it's far more spiritual than actually that. I think it's to do with, it's not what I would call a literalist viewpoint. There's something there that's far deeper. And it has a lot to do with our head, you see, inside of us. It's not an external thing, but it's an internal thing. But anyway, I wish you a good night, and thank you for listening, and you take care.